Well, hello and welcome, or welcome back to Read Becca for my chatty catch-up for the week on everything I am currently reading, everything I finished this week, and everything I'm looking forward to reading. So hopefully I can manage coherence here, because I sort of accidentally expended all of my energy on trying to clean up my side garden, clear out a bunch of dead ivy. I've been killing it off to clear it out and plant some better ground cover. But I got through about like 5 to 7 feet of that and realized I didn't have any remaining energy, and also that I was out of garden bags. So I'm gonna have to go do that before I recharge a little energy as well before I continue on. So I'm about halfway done. And then I also took an allergy pill, which thoroughly knocked me out afterward, because spring has indeed sprung around here and we are facing some allergies. So nice to start that really early in the year. But so I'm just up from a slight drowse. It wasn't quite a nap. It was a little laying in bed trying to get warm and cozy and relax a little. So hopefully I think I can manage coherence. So I have read a good amount this week, but I do want to sort of rewind and jump back to a book that I finished a while ago, but I couldn't talk about because of the HarperCollins union strike. And that is Anne of Manhattan by Brina Starler. So obviously the union has reached a deal with Harper, so they are saying everything can go forward with discussing these books now. This fortunately was the only book that I had from them over that time because I kind of kept putting things off. But I did enjoy this book very much, so I'm super happy to be talking about it. It is somewhat like an Anne of Green Gables fanfic. Obviously from the title, we've translated this whole setting of Anne and Green Gables to New York. Green Gables is a bed and breakfast off New York in some sort of touristy island, I imagine, a bit Martha's Vineyard-esque, if not directly. And it's contemporary. We have Anne going to grad school to be a teacher, and it perfectly captures the Anne and Gilbert relationship for me. So I think you do have to have nostalgia for the Anne of Green Gables story to really enjoy this, because it does read as a little bit fanficky and sort of a reader play out of what they want to see from that relationship in a modern setting. So naturally, Gilbert is coming back. His father's sick. He's decided to put his own studies in California on hold and come closer to where his family is and start going to university at the same school that Anne is at. So they haven't seen or talked to each other since they both left for college at opposite ends of the country years ago. Naturally, we get some flashbacks to that, when at a beach bonfire, they had an impromptu kiss. And so they've had this tension, romantic tension, looming over them ever since that. So as it happens in romances always, they get thrown together by circumstances at university. They have courses together. They're both going to school to be teachers at this point. And I enjoyed it so much because it does capture the dynamic perfectly between them. The one thing that I didn't like about this is that the third act conflict didn't seem like it was true to the characters that we know or had been depicted in the story. So there is a third act conflict. There's always a third act conflict of some sort in romances, but the way it played out, I didn't really like it. Otherwise, everything about this was perfect and played into my love for the Anne of Green Gables story. So that's pretty much all I have to say about like selling this to you. If you love Anne of Green Gables and you kind of want more and a dedicated romance story, this was great. I adored it. It added a lot of new elements and fresh things to the dynamics. Diana Barry is kind of bi. Rachel and Marilla are a couple. So that's interesting after a very long time as friends. It seems like they're getting together. And so it has kind of brought that into a space of, playing to what a modern reader might want to imagine the story as. So I liked that aspect. I think the writing is very competent. Like, when I say it's sort of fanficky, that does not refer to the quality of the writing being unprofessional or anything. It's just that it has been directly lifted from an existing work. The writing feels like it's a very solid work. It's been well edited. I think this is a first published book by this author, so that's really interesting to see. And I went in with completely wrong expectations based on things I had heard from other reviewers, that this was going to be like a very spicy, those were kind of the keywords I was getting, but indirectly, and it's not that at all. I was a little thrown off because I had sort of prepared myself for it to be a litany of them just hooking up, and it's not. It's a very sweet romance. In fact, I would say this is kind of like rated R versus like adult, because we have a whole first half of the book where that beach kiss in the backstory is the only thing that has happened with them physically. There is on-page sex. They do have open door sex scene, but it's open door, as I said, kind of R-rated, where you know what's happening. What's happening is being described, but it's not in graphic or erotic detail. There are no genitals described in here, so it's sort of vague. So, and that really only happens in the back half, and I think twice. So this was definitely not the ultra sexy book that I was expecting, that was just, you know, like fan service. It was definitely a much more lovely romance that engaged with the actual story of Anne of Green Gables, and specifically delivered us the characters that we know very well from the story. So I enjoyed almost everything about it. It was a great time. Then I picked up my bestseller for February and finished it, and that is River of the Gods. This is Genius, Courage, and Betrayal in the Search for the Source of the Nile by Candice Millard. If my bestseller project continues on like this, I'm 2 for 2 with 5-star reads. I did not expect that. I expected some entertaining books, but I didn't expect like really great books. I am obviously picking books that are to my taste very much. I'm not picking like Colleen Hoover or anything, but this has been so enjoyable. So hopefully we will continue on with bestsellers being great. But this one is kind of, as it says, it's about the search for the Nile, even though people already live there. And I think that is a good kicking off point for what's so great about this. This is a compelling read because it's about that wonder of discovery and exploration, but the author is balancing so well the fact that people already live there, that they had methods of mapping that simply weren't respected by the British colonizers who were coming in. And so there were already maps to locations that they were trying to go to. There were already routes to get there. They just were disrespected. And so our two explorers here are Burton and Speak. And Burton is such a character that he draws you in right away. We're introduced to him early in the book before he has envisioned this journey to the Nile. He's sort of almost anthropological in his methodology of going about the world. Both our explorers are military. For Burton, he's an agnostic. He doesn't seem to have interest in really social climbing. So his military service, mainly to me, seems like his way of making connections to achieve the aims of being a really worldly man and having an interest in cultures other than his own. So the introduction to him is very quirky because he's attempting to disguise himself as an Arab in order to take a journey, a Hajj, to Mecca, because he'll be killed clearly as a British white man going there to this holy site. And he accomplishes this. He successfully gets away with it. And he learned the language, he learned how to present himself in the right ways, culturally appropriate as he can, and he convinces people to guide him there. So that's the kicking off point with him. He is such a strong character, and I'll read a short passage here about describing who he is that just gets across in the text what I love about the writing so much of this book. That's such a strength to the book. The author does a wonderful job of compelling the reader along while informing incredibly well. Not only did Burton not feel British, he had often been told, and never in an admiring way, that neither did he look particularly British. No one who met him ever forgot his face. Bram Stoker, who would go on to write Dracula, was shaken by his first encounter with Burton. The man riveted my attention, Stoker later wrote. He was dark and forceful and masterful and ruthless. I never saw anyone like him. He is steel. He would go through you like a sword. Burton's friend, the poet Algernon Charles Swinburne, wrote that he had, quote, the jaw of a devil and the brow of a god, unquote, and described his eyes as having, quote, a look of unspeakable horror, end quote. Burton's black eyes, which he had inherited from his English-Irish father, seemed to mesmerize everyone he met. Friends, enemies, acquaintances described them as variously as magnetic, imperious, aggressive, burning, even terrible, and compared them to every dangerous wild animal they could think of, from a panther to a stinging serpent. Equally striking were his thick black hair, his deep, resonant voice, and even his teeth, which may have inspired literature's most iconic vampire. Stoker would never forget watching, enthralled as Burton spoke, his upper lip rising menacingly. His canine tooth showed its full length, he wrote, like the gleam of a dagger. So it's not just rich writing there. You can see she is establishing sources along the way without having to point the reader out of the text to a footnote, and that's carried out throughout the whole book. There are no footnotes in the book. There is a massive section of references, index, bibliography toward the end, but it doesn't pull you out of the text, and she is layering the information on there really strong and giving us great color text to tell us, you know, a little peppered in quotes and anecdotes about people who knew him, make him seem like this fully fleshed out, fully formed individual who is really a character. So I love the actual writing of this the most, in terms of like the story elements were written so well. So Burton starts planning for this great expedition that he wants to do to find the source of the Nile, and things are sort of going wrong along the way in the planning, and he's losing the backing of certain people and the help that he expected to have, and that's what sets him off to pulling in Speake. And Speake would not be his normal type of guy. Speake is very British affluenza, total opposite from him, really arrogant and overly caught up in himself, a bit narcissistic. And he's just a very grating personality who kind of expects to get everything he wants. And he's also a big game hunter. So he really wants to go on this expedition as a tool for his big game hunting, because he has these lofty ideas of having this collection, a private collection specifically, of these animals that he has brought back. And that's kind of gross, I have to say. I would say that does not remain a big element, but as we're being introduced to the character of Speake, we do hear a lot of gruesome stuff that he's done to animals, and I did not enjoy that, but it does cease after we kind of get through that initial bit. But so he's that kind of guy. He's very like toxic, gross dude, and he's using his military connections for power and for social hierarchy climbing. And he doesn't understand if he's turned away from things. So he's kind of strongly arguing because he wants to go along on this expedition to the Nile and for his own aims. He's not as interested in getting to the source of the Nile himself. And things fall together, so Burton goes along with it and kind of almost at a whim winds up in this pairing that they're total opposites. Now, Speake, along the way, as they're going on this big, great expedition, is a person who holds on to grudges, and he sort of stores away every perceived slight. And that really builds up over the course of the story. So it becomes a lot of drama over the story between their interpersonal relationship as the leaders of this expedition, the fact that they're constantly beset by problems, both, financial issues, ailments, like really bad illnesses over the course of this. They are dealing with massive deserters because they can't provide properly at times. And they are taking along, of course, a lot of locals and people who are enslaved that are along on the journey that clearly don't want to be there, that they're mistreating quite badly. I was a little shocked, she does such a good job of balancing the people that are there locally as guides and the people who are enslaved that are along the way as sharing their experience and what that would have been, not necessarily going heavy-handed into how bad that was or looking at it from a modern lens, but simply trying to incorporate their existence there and share what they would have been experiencing along the way. So I think that balance is done so well here. So we have a third figure as a result of that, who is sort of the native guide that really is the reason their expedition was able to get as far as it was, and that's Sidi Mubarak Bombay. I was a little frustrated at first because we're being introduced to his character and he's just referred to as Bombay. And then we're also in discussions about the localities where the place Bombay is being referenced as well. And so it got a little confusing. But then she layers in explaining why his name is what it is, and that it has to do with slave naming rules, because he was an enslaved person and has since been freed before becoming their guide. And like having that perspective on why it is confusing and that it is a reference to the place name as well, and how the slave naming kind of stole his own personal identity, and just as he was stolen and then sold for a bolt of cloth because he wasn't even worth any money as a child. And just the devaluing there is really incredibly told. So, but he was instrumental to this, and I think it's very respectful of this story to place such a big focus on him when he hasn't really been written about substantively before, according to the book. So he also was instrumental to other explorers as they came after, because he had gained such a reputation over the course of multiple expeditions with these explorers. So I think that was a great balance, as I've said. The author really managed to layer things in. I just enjoyed this so much. The drama was very high. You have all of those elements of wonder and discovery. I love the character of Burton as we see his personal life progress, and that he's a strong agnostic and who marries a Catholic woman who really is trying to get him to be much more in the church than he cares about as he gets older, because he knows Arabic from earlier in his life and he's always had a strong connection there. He starts translating taboo works and really bucks the norms of British society and culture, and starts up like a taboo club for reading things like the Kama Sutra. And he's just such a dynamic figure that I really want to learn more about. Even now, having read this book, I would read a whole nother book all about him, definitely. So this was a compulsively readable nonfiction about a really interesting topic that I knew absolutely nothing about. And it was amazing to read the dramas and the conflicts between these two explorers as they went along. So fantastic read. Then I read a collection of short stories, Bliss Montage by Ling. And actually I think both River of Gods and Bliss Montage are currently up for the BookTube prize. I'm not currently judging though, so I can talk about them. But I enjoyed this one. So this was a no duds collection, but also no favorites. If you've read Severance at all, the tone here is really similar. All of the stories in here do have a minor speculative-y element, but it's really background for discussing something more mundane and real. So we have, I think, 10 stories. The first story is Los Angeles and then Oranges, and those two are very much exploring like abusive relationships. So Los Angeles is quite short, and we're following this woman who lives in a house with her husband and her family, as well as 100 ex-boyfriends, including her abusive ex. And so it's things like that where like that's backdrop, and we're really exploring interpersonal relationships and really mundane things through these stories. We have G and Not Office Hours, Peking Duck, and Tomorrow all really engage with the elements of being Asian American and immigrant family relationships in a really incredible way, that each of them is subtly doing something different. And again, they each have this speculative element to them that helps us look at things differently. I think some of them I liked the themes they were exploring, but I didn't actually get the story plot. Returning, we are following a couple who are going on a trip to his home country, which is kind of a strange place. And I love the structure of the story. It's to the title, Returning. I think that references this almost looping structure that it's told in, where we start at the present as this woman's waking up on a plane and her husband's not there. He's already deplaned, and she's been left behind as the only person on the plane at this small airport, and he's taken their bags and everything, and so she's off looking for him. So that's the present part, but we follow that forward a little bit, and then we jump back, and we get recontextualize what was happening just before, leading up to their travel. And then we pass the point we got to before in the current, and then we jump back again a little further and we recontextualize again. And so it does this really cool looping structure where we get additional context by looping back around to the present. So really interesting. But the actual story, I'm not sure like what the point of the story was that it was getting at. I enjoyed the themes to it. It had some really interesting things about the relationship, about him being from this really odd country. And I think there were certain things that was trying to say, but didn't actually tell us in the plot of the story. So yeah, I don't want to talk about that a ton, but Yeti lovemaking was a really intriguing one that I think sort of connects back to the abusive boyfriends thing, maybe, in that it talks about the predatory relationship between men and women. And I loved that one. It's so short, I can't talk about it at all without totally spoiling it, but great story. And I mean, yeah, I really enjoyed this collection. I think it had everything that I like about Ling Ma's writing, and it's really tackling those kind of heavier themes and being really insightful. The writing is very readable, really easy to read. Let me read a quote for you. This is from the story Peking Duck. I've never had Peking duck, but it was once an image of near iconography. In the past life in Fuzhou, it represented some reality other than the one of daily congee and pickled turnips, cabbage, and boiled rib soup. On TV in the evenings, I saw it in soap operas, set among the wealthy, in commercials filmed in Hong Kong. When I moved to the US, however, I forget about it. Flipping through picture books, sometimes I conflate Peking duck with similar-looking images. A turkey from a story about the origins of Thanksgiving. The roast chicken that's part of a hallucinatory dinner spread that appears to the little match girl. Foods she's fantasized about, but never tasted. So she's talking about having never actually tasted Peking duck because it was an upper class sort of thing where she was from. And then in the US, having that strong icon of food that has an emotional and cultural attachment, and linking and combining an amalgam of that with the American food iconography of the turkey or the chicken in these fantasies. And I just really enjoyed the way that it looks at that. So well done. So yeah, I love her writing. I am here for anything she writes next. I didn't like this quite as much as Severance because that, as a novel, even a short novel, it had a lot more room to explore those concepts. And I feel like the shorts that the story didn't deliver maybe could have been expanded out a bit more. So overall, great collection. I enjoyed every bit of it. So that is what I finished this week. It's a good amount. I am currently reading a ton as usual. Working on The Cluttered Corpse by Simon Brett. Really enjoying this actually, surprising me a bit. And an older woman protagonist too. Tales from Gavagans Bar, slowly but surely chipping away at that one. The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. I'm very much in the back half of this one. And The Best of World SF, Volume 2. I also, on audio, have the fourth Frida Klein novel, Thursday's Children, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm nearly done. I think I'm only a couple hours from finishing the audio, which is good because my audio hold for Nona the Ninth came in, and I'm very excited for it. It's a brand new release. It's the third in the Locked series. So I'm like debating, do I just put Thursday's Children on hold, even though I'm so close to being finished, or do I blaze through? Because I really want to get to Nona the Ninth. I think I'm going to try and finish it out later today. Do some crochet and listen to my audiobook, finish up Thursday's Children, and dive into Nona the Ninth. So that is all of my reading for the week. I have a lot of other stuff to talk about though, because I mentioned last week how easy it is to get caught on the treadmill of talking about current events. And I have done that to myself. The first thing I want to talk about is sort of partially a pat on my own back, but partially a warning for those of you that are in states that have upcoming discussions about legalization of marijuana. So my state recently legalized, yay, but we went through multiple years of struggles with the different bills, and it was much closer than it should have been to not passing. And in large part, that was due to this major propaganda effort that seems to come up every time legalization is on the cusp of occurring, not just in my state, but in other nearby states, where even people I know well who were completely for legalization were backpedaling about these bills passing multiple times. So we had it on ballots a couple times. And in every case, it was because, well, this is not quite the perfect bill, specifically for reasons to do with growing. And that it was going to be the who and how were too controlled by the government and whatnot, which is always going to be the case, right? And for these friends to be overly concerned about that, like personal use growth at small scale is legal. So they were never going to be facing this situation where they were going to become professional growers. So this was not going to impact them. But that backpedaling and division over this propaganda about growth specifically is something I've seen play out over and over. And for people to expect a perfect bill in the first instance, like you don't want that. You want to make incremental progress. So one step forward, even if it's not 100% of the way, is a step forward. You want to get that in and then progress to the next step, right? So the arguments I would get into with people over this was so frustrating because we are talking about the actual lives of people being negatively impacted by the previous criminalization of marijuana. And so they're saying all these people should just wait on it for the perfect bill to come through for another couple years before we can even try again, right? And meanwhile, these people's lives are being affected. So the reason I'm bringing this up and patting myself on the back for having had that argument with friends and colleagues is that this week, as of March, the record expungement happened, and they came out with the numbers, and it was over 7,000 people had their records expunged. So that's 7,000 people's lives being impacted by this, that many sane people were saying, oh, you just need to wait a couple more years till we get the perfect bill out there. And now those people are going to have a change in potential for jobs, for housing because of this. So I'm so happy we didn't wait for the perfect bill, that we did get in what we got in, and that we will continue to make progress toward that perfect bill. That's just how our government system works in the US. I think in most places that are, democratically governed, you have to start with a small step and continue making incremental progress. And people are, I feel like at this point, having purity challenges to any sort of political progress where they have to go 100% of the way. So I just implore you, if you are in a state that's facing this, have that discussion with your friends or family who might be propagandized about this particular element, because I have seen this come up constantly. Make the argument for people's lives here, because it really does truly make a huge difference if we can get that changed. So the other story in the current events that I want to talk about from the past week is an even scarier one, but I'm also very tempered about it. So it is incredibly telling, because we've had the Roald Dahl dust up on book 2, that in the past week there has been a story about Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis is the governor of Florida. He has been increasingly posing a pushback toward any discussion of LGBTQ people. And his attacks have strongly gone toward Disney World. So this week he came out saying that they, a board he has appointed, I guess, are going to control Disney's content, specifically to mitigate gay and woke content from making it out there to children. Of course, it's always about the children, right? So to have the situation that we're in, where there has been this massive outburst of discussion about the Roald Dahl estate and publisher, who are actually in control of the rights and the image of Roald Dahl, making decisions about censoring or changing text to past works. That's been all over. But I haven't heard a peep about Ron DeSantis saying this. And it's not something to take too seriously right now because obviously they're not making content at Disney World, largely. It's not happening there. So what they're going to do, yet to be seen. I don't think that's going to be a major problem. But he has been increasingly making attacks on them over them kind of pushing back on him about discussing gay stuff. So the lead up to this has been that effectively Disney had their own sovereign district, sort of, mainly because they were paying for all the things that would be public services for the region around their site. They have massive property in Florida for, well, Disney World, obviously. And as a result of his pushback and the conflict between them, he pulled out of that district being covered by them. So now the taxpayers are going to have to cover all these public services and the upkeep of this district rather than Disney themselves. So it's actually good for Disney, probably, other than they're probably going to let it run down and get damaged and not have the public services it needs, potentially, which is a concern. So that has all been going on for quite some time, for months. And somehow this governor is, acting as a dictator along the way here. But now we're into, they haven't appeased him enough by not being woke. And he's continually increasing and stepping up those attacks on the Disney Corporation to the point where he is saying, I'm going to actually stop your content from coming out. So, as I said up front, that remains to be seen how or like what power he's going to have over doing that. But it's a clear attack where a government official is stating he's going to censor a private corporation's content, their free speech out into the world. And that's scary. That's much more scary to me than the whole Roald Dahl controversy. And yet I haven't heard a single peep about it. I don't know why people aren't talking about this, because that's like straight up First Amendment violations. That's straight up censorship, government censorship. This is dystopian in its expression. Obviously, it's not directly to do with books, so maybe that's why people are not talking about it as much on BookTube. But it's wild that we have this contrast between the outburst over Dahl and silence, just utter silence over actual government censorship being stated. So yeah, I'm very concerned about that. I don't know how it will play out. We will see. It's kind of just come to light this week. So yeah, scary stuff in the US, but particularly like Florida needs to get their stuff together. Really do some voting, please. Yeah, so I think that is all I have for this week. I have one recommendation to share with you, and that is a delightful, as always, chat from Sean the Book Maniac. It wasn't an interview, it was more of a chat, as I said, with Ronan Hession, the author, who discussed books. Of course, it's a long, rambly discussion, though, and talked about translation. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it the most, I think. But the two of them are both great figures, and to have them both discussing was wonderful. So I heartily recommend you go check out that discussion. It is well worth it, though it's a long video, to sit down and watch the whole thing. So definitely go check out Sean. So that is it for me today. Thank you so much for watching.